Welcome back, all my 40K fanatics out there. I'm DJ here with Tim's Nation, and today I want to talk to you about one of the bigger conversation points that usually pops up and can lead to some controversy as far as it's concerned. This is a chess clock, or clock, as we often just hear people refer to in Warhammer competitive circuits. And these are basically supplied at most GTs. Not a lot of people have played with them, used them, and it's just been heard about. So one of the things I want to do is I want to make a quick video talking about this chess clock, how it's used in 40K, how we play with it, and give you some ideas. So maybe if you're able to, you can try it at some of your home games just to be prepared for that rare one-off moment that you may have to use a clock. Guys, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. We're on that last home stretch. We're getting ready to getting very close to that 1,000 subscriber point that hope like to hit by the summer. Please comment down below. I'm looking forward to looking back and getting some new content, especially past April, once we get past this competitive scene and moving into 10th edition. Like, share, and all that jazz. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section and what some more information that you'd like me to bring or talk about. Maybe some little things that you hear and see on the internet that aren't really explained as well. That's what I like to try and do here, is try and take some of that, the over-the-top Warhammer talk and things that are described in just letters and quickly, and try and break them down and explain it so that someone new getting into the game competitively can understand what we're talking about. And today we're talking about this little guy, chess clock. So in over 20 years of competitive 40K, I have probably, I was thinking about it really long and hard the other day. I think there was only 5 times that I've ever actually used a clock or been told to use a clock. And for the most part, those times are final round of a GT, or my opponent was being suspicious of slow play. So the top level GT moment is more common than the slow playing opponent. So top level GT, sometimes the TO is getting held to a time restraint and wants to finish everything up. In the top tables, there is prize support and stuff that goes out to it that they want to have everything situated and ready to go so that we can start to move people. Some people have long drives home. Some people have to catch a flight. So we try to make this so that people can get where they need to get to when they need to get there based on that TO's time frame. And this helps the TO make sure to maintain that for the top tables that may have prize support, et cetera, that they're scoring throughout it. The slow play, I mean, every once in a while you're going to have a guy, somebody, anybody, who they just don't, they don't know the rules all that well, or I don't want to accuse and say that someone is deliberately trying to slow play to win a game. I don't think that I don't want to believe that people would actually do that. However, I mean, unfortunately, it could be a reality of things. So there has been a couple times where I've had a judge come up to me and say, hey, we've had some accused of your opponent. Can you clock this game? And typically, I'll tell you, the clock gets started and we end up forgetting about the clock. And I don't ever have an issue with those opponents. I don't see the same thing. You know, maybe it's some things that it's like, oh, they're watching you, so now be careful. I don't know. I'm not a negative person. I tend to be more positive about it. And I tend to think that that people are not inherently going to cheat or be dirty with a game of toy soldiers. And I could be foolish for it, but that's the belief I want to go into it, because again, at the end of the day, this is a game. This is a game of toy soldiers that we paint. This is a hobby, and I don't want to believe that people are going to do that stuff. I know it exists out there, but I'd rather be fooled and assume that everyone's going to be a good person than start trying to go on a witch hunt per se. Unless I'm playing Grey Knights, in which case I'm always going on a witch hunt, and that's a different story. So let's talk about this clock and how this clock works for Warhammer. So typically you have 3 hours for a game. And this, everything I'm going to say is just typically, because we're going to go through this as what I've seen. Your TO may say something different. And that is my addendum for it, is a TO may say something different. It's specifically one spot, which I'll cover in a second. So chess clock is simply this. you have the time on both sides that each player has. With a game of Warhammer, we have 3 hours, so each player would have an hour and a half. When you press the button on your side, it starts the timer on your opponent's side, and that's the time that they have to spend for the game. Now, some TOs will say start it at an hour and 50 and count it in deployment. Some people will say it starts at an hour 30, don't use deployment. That's going to depend on the TO, but either way, you have about 3 hours, so you get an hour and a half per player to play your game. So once you set up, you get who's going to deploy first and everything like that. Then that's when the clock can first make its introduction into this game. I recommend placing it in the middle. It's not fair to have it sitting off to the side where your deployment zone may be closer to it, so you're able to hit that button faster, and your opponent has to not only sprint over to hit the button to not lose time, but they're trying to trip over their models or breaking stuff. It's easiest just to set it in the middle between the two of you if deployment is required to be clocked. So once you go through deployment and all of that, then the game actually starts. Now, throughout the game, the timer is going to be going down. You have an hour and a half for each opponent to play, and that's the time you have to spend. How you choose to do it is on you. So let's assume that deployment was being clocked. All right, so now we go into the game. I roll the dice. Oh, my opponent's going to go first. All right, so we say, all right, you ready to go? You unpause the clock in whichever fashion it may be, and your opponent goes. So now their timer is going to start to go down as they play their turn. They make their turn, they roll their dice, they shoot everything. Never does it change over. Doesn't matter if you're making armor saves, doesn't matter on anything. That stays on their clock. So once they say, all right, and my turn is done, you can go. They hit the button, button's over on you, now you're on the time. And you go and you play and you do everything you're supposed to do, Now, wait a minute, there is a rules question. Hold on, judge. You need to call a judge. Once you say call a judge, you pause the clock, the time stops. The time stops to bring the judge interaction. No one is penalized for time while asking a judge. So judge comes over, you do all that stuff, et cetera, you figure it out. Okay, cool, good, we have a rule. All right, unpause, back to your clock, back to your turn. And you start doing what you're supposed to do. So you move everything out. You guys play the game back and forth, turns go by. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're at turn 5. All right. Actually, we'll say turn 4. You're at turn 4. And your opponent only has 3 minutes left. And so they're doing their turn, 3 minutes pass, and the timer goes off. Now we're going to be speaking in the hypothetical because the easiest is if the timer doesn't go off and the timer is fine and you're playing the game and the game ends, cool, then it didn't matter. Everyone was clocked, everything was fine. But what happens when your opponent runs out of time? Now, this is really important. Some TOs, and as I've seen it, most TOs, if you get to the point where there's like 1 or 2 minutes left and you're finishing turn 5 and you end up going over by like a minute, 30 seconds, something like that, they just wash it. They go, you really came in close to that. There might have been something where maybe you sneezed one too many times. Oops. Or maybe counting out some dice. Something small happened, but you just needed another 60 seconds to finish out your turn and then you're done. Fine. But now when it gets into things like you're starting turn 4 and you have a minute left and you're supposed to play 2 more turns, that's where a TO is going to stop and go, no, you didn't spend your time wisely. So how does that penalty work? Where does that happen and what happens at that point? Well, once your time is up, that's it. You're done. You're not allowed to move. You're not allowed to shoot, assault, or do anything. The only thing you're allowed to do is remove models and make armor saves. You are not even allowed to fight back in close combat. You are allowed to do nothing. When your time expires, your time expires. And that can be very harsh in those situations. I mean, can you think about a game that you've played that was close, and on turn 4, if you're told, no, you used up all your time. Now, you can't move anything. You can't do anything. You have to just take armor saves and that's it. That's probably going to cost you the game. So how do you get around this stuff? Because that's a very, very harsh reality and something that may actually, I could see players not wanting to play the game anymore if that scenario happened, because that's a very harsh situation. So what's a good way to get around this? Well, number one, the reason that I own a clock is because you buy one online. They're relatively cheap. You can get them for like 10, 15 bucks. Practice with it. Throw it on the table. So instead of having it at a minute, you can run it at an hour 30, and then when it expires, just go, okay, well, this is where I was at. Maybe I need to figure out and get through and play faster. Because you may not even notice it, that you're sitting back and spending a lot of extra time thinking and doing things. And the whole reason you're not finishing games might be on you. Or it may be on your list. It might be something that you need to make your list a little smaller. I'd hate to tell someone to change your list for time frames, but you don't want to run out of that time. And some tournaments have what's called a hard dice down, which means once they tell you, and that's time, dice down, don't take another turn, don't move forward, finish the turn you're on, you're done. That's points you could lose. You can lose a whole turn's worth of points in some tournaments. So definitely, I recommend if you're concerned about your times, pick one up, download an app on your phone for a chess clock. I'm sure there's some free ones out there as well that you can use, and just see where you stand. You get a practice game with your buddy. Go, hey, I want to use a clock for this one. I just want to see where we're at. Where are we at for that practice game? And it's also good etiquette for your opponent too, because then you're keeping the game at a good pace for the person you're playing against. A lot of times when I would practice like sporting events, stuff like that, we had scrimmages. You have exhibition games. This is part of that exhibition. This is part of that scrimmage, having that clock. Now, again, only like 5 times I've ever been on a clock. And even so, those times, I don't think we even followed it out to a T. A lot of times the clock got forgotten about and we just moved on. So we would end up just finishing the game and looking at the clock, and it would be funny because look at it and go, well, I still have 45 minutes left, but I'm sorry, sir, you only have 2 minutes left. So yeah, it's going to be pretty hard for your turn 4 and 5. And it turns into a funny joking moment because we just forget about the clock. I recommend using it. I recommend practicing with it, even though it's a small window that you're going to use these in. There's a lot of tournaments, a lot of TOs that people have been talking about and saying, should we make this mandatory? Should this be a mandatory thing to always use a clock? And maybe against popular opinion, but the old saying, gun to your head, you have to pick. Do we use a clock? Do we don't? My opinion is, I say yes. I say yes. I would love to use a clock. I would love to have that clock on the table and making sure that we're timing everything and that we know we sit in those 3-hour restraints. Because not only does it protect you, but it also protects with the TO as well too. When they say, okay, well, dice is down, you go, I'm sorry, but we've recorded the time the whole time, and I still have this time. He still has this time. I'm finishing my game to not lose points and be able to also have that defense with the TO to go, but we use the clock, especially if you have to call a TO in on a situation and you said, well, I paused the clock, I followed the rules. This protects you, protects your game, and protects your weekend so that you get the time you're allowed to play your game. So that's about it with the time clocks, with the chess clocks. If there's any questions you guys have as far as these are regarded and how they're used, please let me know in the comments section. I'd be glad to talk about them some more. And we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for watching.